Hey everyone, welcome back to Read Along Saturday. We have taken quite a break. So, a quick recap. We have been reading The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, and in the last video that was posted, we have already read till chapter number 13. So, I am linking the videos here. Just go back to the playlist and you can find the entire chapters there. So today we are continuing with chapter number 14, that which concerns a prince on the subject of the art of war. A prince ought to have no other aim or thought, nor select anything else for his study than war and its rules and discipline. For this is the sole art that belongs to him who rules, and it is of such force that it not only upholds those who are born princes, but it often enables men to rise from a private station to that rank. And on the contrary, it is seen that when princes have thought more of ease than of arms, they have lost their states. And the first cause of your losing is to neglect this art. And what enables you to acquire a state is to the master of the art. Francesco Sforza, through being Marshal from a private person, became Duke of Milan, and the sons, through avoiding the hardships and troubles of arms, from dukes became private persons. For among other evils which being unarmed brings you, it causes you to be despised, and this is one of those ignominies against which a prince ought to guard himself, as it's shown later on, because there is nothing proportionate between the armed and the unarmed. And it is not reasonable that he who is armed should yield obedience willingly to him who is unarmed, or that the unarmed man should be secure among armed servants, because there being in the one disdain and in the other suspicion, it is not possible for them to work well together. And therefore, a prince who does not understand the art of war, over and above the other misfortunes already mentioned, cannot be respected by his soldiers, nor can we rely on them. He ought never, therefore, to have out of his thoughts the subject of war, and in peace he should addict himself more to his exercise than in war. This he can do in two ways, the one by action, the other is by study. As regards action, he ought above all things to keep his men well organized and drilled, to follow insensibly the chase, by which he accustoms his body to hardship, and learns something of nature of legalities, and gets to find out how the mountains rise, how the valleys open out, how the plains lie, and to understand the nature of rivers and marshes, and in all this to take the greatest care. Which knowledge is useful in two ways. Firstly, he learns to know his country and is better able to undertake its defense. Afterwards, by the means of knowledge and observation of that locality, he understands with ease any other which may be necessary for him to study thereafter, because the hills, valleys, and the plains, rivers, marshes that are, for instance, in Tuscany, have a certain resemblance to those of other countries, so that with the knowledge of aspect of one country, one can easily arrive at the knowledge of others. And the prince that lacks the skill lacks the essential, which is desirable that a captain should possess, for it teaches him to surprise his enemy, to select quarters, to lead armies, to disarray the battle, and besiege towns to advantage. Philophon, prince of Achaeans, among other praises which writers have bestowed on him, is commended because in time of peace he never had anything in his mind but the rules of war. And when he was in the country with friends, he often stopped and reasoned with them. If the enemy should be upon the hill, we should find ourselves here with our army, with whom would be the advantage? How should one best advance to meet him, keeping the ranks? If we should wish to retreat, how ought we pursue? And he would set forth to them as he went all the chances that could befall an army. He would listen to their opinion and state his confirming it with reasons, so that by these continual discussions There could never arise in the time of war any unexpected circumstances that he could not deal. But to exercise the intellect, the prince should read histories and study there the actions of illustrious men, to see how they have borne themselves in war, to examine the causes of the victories and defeat, so as to avoid the latter and imitate the former, and above all, as an illustrious man did, who took an exemplar, one who has been praised and famous before him, and whose achievements and deeds he always kept in mind. As it was said, Alexander the Great imitated Achilles, Caesar Alexander, Scipio Cyrus, and whoever reads the life of Cyrus, written by Xenophon, will recognize afterwards in the life of Scipio how that imitation was his glory, and how in chastity, affability, humanity, and liberty Scipio confirmed to those things which have been written by Cyrus by Xenophon. A wise prince ought to observe some such rules, and never in peaceful times stand idle, but increase his resources with industry in such a way that they may be available to him in adversity, so that if fortune changes, it may find him prepared to resist her blows. So that was chapter number 14. Let us discuss what it exactly told us. So, the core principle that it talked about was a prince's sole focus and highest priority must be the art of war, even in the times of peace, right? So, why war is paramount? It is the only art that truly belongs to him who commands. It means by which states are both acquired and maintained. Princes who neglect lose their states, and those who master rise to the power. Now, how the prince cultivates the art of war. There are two ways: in action and in study. So, in action means practice. Practice means teach him how to know his country, understand the terrain, mountains, valleys, plains, rivers, swamps, whatever. And he applies this knowledge to any territory he can like come across, right? So, and the next one is constant military exercises and training, rehearsing battle scenarios, talking about them. The second part, that is in study, that is theory. Now you have to read for that the histories, the famous and illustrious man that came before you who have been in war and won them. So you have to read those scenarios and learn from them, right? The great example given here is of Alexander Caesar. And chapter number 15, concerning things for which men and especially princes are praised or blamed. It remains now to see what ought to be the rules of conduct for a prince towards subject and friends. And as I know that many have written on this point, I expect I shall be considered presumptuous in mentioning it again, especially as in discussing it I shall depart from the methods of other people. But it is being my intention to write a thing which shall be useful to him who apprehends it, it appears to me more appropriate to follow up the real truth of the matter than the imagination of it. For many have pictured republics and principalities which in fact have never been known or seen, because how one lives is so far distant from how one ought to live, that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner affects his ruin than his preservation. For a man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets with what destroys him among so much that is evil. Hence, it is necessary for a prince wishing to hold his own to know how to do wrong, and to make use of it or not according to necessity. Therefore, putting on one side imaginary things concerning a prince and discussing those which are real, I say that all men, when they are spoken of, and chiefly princes, for being more highly placed, are remarkable for some of those qualities which bring them either blame or praise. And thus it is that one is reputed liberal, another miserly, using a Tuscan term, because an avaricious man in our language is still he who desires to possess by robbery, whilst we call one miserly who deprives himself too much of the use of his own. One is reputed generous, one rapacious, one cruel, one compassionate, one faithless, another faithful, one effeminate and cowardly, another bold and brave, one affable, another haughty, one lascivious, another chaste, one sincere, another cunning, one hard, another easy, one grave, another frivolous, one religious, another unbelieving, and the like. And I know that everyone who confessed that is would be most praiseworthy in the prince to exhibit all the above qualities that are considered good, but because they can neither be entirely possessed nor observed by human conditions, do not permit it. It is necessary for him to be sufficiently prudent that he may know how to avoid the reproach of these vices which would lose him his state, and also to keep himself, if it is possible, from those which would not lose him it. But this not being possible, he may be less hesitation abandon himself to them. And again, he need not make himself uneasy in incurring a reproach for those vices, without which the state can only be saved with difficulty. For if everything is considered carefully, it would be found that the something which looks like virtue, if followed, would be his ruin, whilst something else which looks like a vice, yet followed, brings him security and prosperity. That was chapter number 15. Well, that was short. Let us discuss the main key points for it. So, the core idea is that Machiavelli shifts from how to acquire and maintain states to the qualities of a prince, but from a purely pragmatic and realistic perspective, not an idealistic one. The world as it is. Princes must learn how not to be good and to use or not to use goodness as necessity dictates. Machiavelli acknowledges that it would be praiseworthy for a prince to possess all conventionally good qualities. However, given human nature and political realities, possessing and always acting on these virtues can lead to a ruin. So, a pragmatic approach is necessary. You need to be prudent enough to avoid vices that would cost you the state, also to avoid virtues that, if rigidly adhered to, must lead to your downfall. So, the main point is a prince must prioritize the security and stability of his state above all else. This often means he cannot afford to act according to the conventional morality. Moving on to chapter number 16 concerning liberality and meanness. Commencing then with the first of the above named characteristics, I say that it would be well to be reputed liberal. Nevertheless, liberality exercised in a way that does not bring you the reputation for it injures you, for if one exercises it honestly and as it should be exercised, it may not become unknown and you will avoid the reproach of his opposite. Therefore, anyone wishing to maintain among men the name of liberal is obliged to avoid no attribute of magnificence, so that a prince that inclined will consume in such acts of all his property, and will be compelled in the end, if he wish to maintain the name of liberal, to unduly weigh down his people and tax them and do everything he can to get money. This will soon make him odious to his subject, and becoming poor, he will be little valued by anyone. Thus, with his liberality, having offended many and rewarded few, he is affected by the first trouble and imperiled by whatever may be the first danger. Recognizing this himself and wishing to draw back from it, he runs at once into the reproach of being miserly. Therefore, a prince not being able to exercise this virtue of liberty in such a way that it recognizes except to his cost, if he is wise, he ought not to fear the reputation of being mean, for in time he will come to more considered than in liberal, seeing that with his economy and his revenues are enough, that he can defend himself against all attacks and is able to engage in enterprises without burdening his people. Thus it comes to pass that he exercises liberality towards all from whom he does not take, whom are numberless, and meanness towards those whom he does not give, who are few. We have not seen great things done in our time except by those who have been considered mean. The rest have failed. Pope Julius II was assisted in reaching the papacy by a reputation of liberality, yet he did not strive afterwards to keep it up. When he made war on the King of France, and he made many wars without imposing any extraordinary tax on his subject, for he supplied his additional expenses out of his long thriftiness. The present King of Spain would not have undertaken or conquered in so many enterprises if he had been reputed liberal. A prince, therefore, provided that he has not to rob his subjects, that he can defend himself, that he does not become poor and abject, that he is not forced to become rapacious, ought to hold a little account of a reputation for being mean, for it is one of those vices which will enable him to govern. And if any one should say, Caesar obtained empire by liberality, and many others have reached the highest position by having been liberal and by being considerate, so I answer, either you are a prince in fact or in a way to become one. In the first case, this liberality is dangerous. In the second, it is very necessary to be considered liberal. Caesar was one of those who wished to become preeminent in Rome. But if he had survived after becoming so and had not moderated his expenses, he would have destroyed his government. And if anyone should reply, many have been princes and have done great things with armies who have been considered very liberal, I reply. Either a prince spends that which is his own or his subjects, or else of that of others. In the first case, he ought to sparing. In the second, he ought not to neglect any opportunity for liberality. And to the prince who goes forth with his army, supporting it by pillage, sack, and extortion, handling that which belongs to others, this liberality is necessary. Otherwise, he would not be followed by soldiers, and of that which is neither yours nor your subjects, you can be ready giver, as were Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander, because it does not take away your reputation if you squander that of others, but adds to it. It is only squandering your own that injures you. And there is nothing wastes so rapidly as liberty, for even whilst you exercise it, you lose the power to do so, and so become either poor or despised, or else in avoiding poverty, rapacious and hated. And a prince should guard himself above all things against being despised and hated, and liberty leads to you both. Therefore, it is wiser to have a reputation for meanness, which brings reproach without hatred, than to be compelled through seeking a reputation for liberty to incur a name for rapacity, which begets reproach with hatred. Okay, that was chapter number 16. Let us move on to its discussion. So, the core question here is, should a prince be generous or stingy? So, the problem with generosity is that if a prince wants to be truly generous in a way that is noticed by many, he must exhaust his resources, leading to heavy taxation and ultimately making him hated by the subjects. Leads to poverty and contempt, and it really does not gain any friends, right? So the virtue of parsimony, now initially reproached, ultimately respected, because a prince who is initially considered parsimonious might be seen as stingy, but in a long run, this quality allows him to wage wars without burdening his people, undertake great enterprises without becoming indigent, and be able to defend himself without extra money. Right? Machiavelli stated a prince can be generous with resources taken from others. Means that if you are in a war, the spoils of the war you can plunder and squander and then distribute into your citizens, and they will be happy. But if you squander your own people, they will hate you. Okay, that was it for today. I will see you next week with the next chapters. And until then, keep reading and keep watching.